feel worse.
shower that.
This much daylight,
And would feel bad.
Look at Sean.
and this is just going away. Pretty soon it's kept here.
He's the real deal.
Now we're good?
Yes. That's all on the
Okay. Thank you everybody for being here for our work meeting tonight, Wednesday, June 14th. Couple of notes tonight before we get started. Is Sherry online?
I am.
There,
I am.
okay.
Can you hear me?
We got Councilmember Warnoff, because to be from
Live from
Toronto.
Canada.
Hey,
Hey.
are they solo there?
They just got an Air Force.
A couple of
It's analog.
items on, just to note now, I'll note it now, on the general meeting, 11-1. I understand we are continuing to a future meeting, which is good.
Oh my gosh.
Which
all
The
these
very last page. Snow removal.
Can we condense this to?
11-1, we're gonna do what with
I
it
can
now?
do front back if
Continue
that makes it.
to a different future meeting.
Oh, okay.
Just looking for a consensus that we can move, we have a resident here regarding 2.7, rather than making him wait till 10:30.
It'll be hours.
On the work meeting?
Yeah, on the work meeting, talking about moving that to first, to the front, if we're okay with that. Any objection to that? Okay. I did wanna ask, how soon do we want to move over 7? Start all the other meetings, we don't wanna go over earlier, right?
I think they're scheduled at
scheduled for
6, 7,
They are 7, okay.
7:10.
We can't go till 7, okay.
Yep.
At one time they were noted,
7.
we said 6:30, I think, so.
They can go later, you just can't go
Go
early.
early, right, okay. Okay. On that note, it's a long meeting, so let's. Let's keep our comments.
You're the chair.
Okay. Take charge.
So far.
I'm gonna end debate on this.
Did you bring your gavel?
Okay. Oh yeah, where's that cat?
Okay.
Okay. Okay, let's get going then. Review of evening's agenda then. Any other
Still up in the air.
comments? Okay. 1.2, future agenda items.
Just have an item, last evening we met with some residents along Juniper Crest, the unfinished park strip portion over there. And they had we're making an inquiry about some opportunities to perhaps decrease the amount of frontage there is there, or the city has. It's a huge patch between their property lines and how much we would need for a grass strip and path and stuff like that. And so they were inquiring as to what changes we could make. And so we thought we should have an agenda item to get some information and discuss that and look at what some possible options might be and the complexities of that, so.
It is, Laura and I went out there last summer and cleaned it up, and it's massive.
Yeah.
I mean, you could fit a small park there,
40,
or a football
40
field.
feet.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Isn't a rugby pitch 40 feet wide? I do have a couple items. I emailed Nathan and Chief Carr this week. Over the weekend, there's lots of course, on Sunday, you meet with all your residents, right? And so I get lots of conversations about safety on this crosswalk out here on Main Street, and it's been a topic ever since it was put in. And I know Chief and Blake and Nathan are working on some ideas, so I wanna see that come up in sometime in the future.
So some of the traffic.
I think it's been in front of the traffic committee probably several times, 10 times.
Every other time we have a traffic meeting.
Yeah.
We discuss that. Usually right around when the school starts.
Yeah, it's not recently, but I think it was 9 or 10 months ago.
I think we've talked about it at least twice since then.
Some of the complaints is like sun in the eyes, drivers not paying attention, mostly drivers' fault, right, or not paying attention or seeing. I don't know what we can do for that, except yell at them. But kids using the county facilities are off summer, not used to having crosswalks, knowledge, information of crosswalk safety, that kind of stuff, so. The other thing, fiber, I know it's been a couple months since we've seen an update on fiber. or it feels like it's been a couple months. I don't know where we're at that, so.
I think it's planned to come be presented in August.
Okay.
They're putting together a high level design right now. It's gonna take them a few months to do it, and so they'll be right at the tail end of the design when
Okay.
that presentation comes.
Perfect, I just didn't know that, so August sometime, perfect,
Are we getting
so I
some
don't need that to,
just general information?
Yeah, let's put something out on that one.
Just as a comment on that, over in the Riverman area over there, you know, I was driving through there and noticed all of the narrow trenching they were doing for like Google Fiber out there. And what they've done after they've come through, and it looks awful. So we're not doing that from the
So-
substance we talked about, the fill,
There-
right?
There is going to be a meeting tomorrow. Lehigh, Strata, and some of our folks are gonna go out and take a look at their method they're using down there. And Justin will speak more to it, they're looking at some of the options to make it a better product. It definitely does save a lot of cost doing it that way, but there's also some downside. Impact the roads and
Yeah,
stuff.
they have these basically white strips down the road.
They'll end up being black, cause they'll put the crack seal material
Over the top of it.
that.
Okay.
So one thing is, that is one of the preferred methods, cause it is cheaper. But like we said, when we come with Strata in the next month or two, that's gonna be one of the considerations you'll have to make is construction costs and methods.
Got
So
it.
that is one of them.
Okay.
there might be some instances where micro trenching makes sense, right, but.
But for most of it, it's going to, yeah.
Existing subdivisions where the fences are right up to the sidewalk and the PUDs are hard to get into. Or there's light lighting in the park strip, so we have power arcs, sidewalks hard to get over, so yeah, there's a different situation for every subdivision.
Okay, council discussion of future citizen recognition.
Oh, there it is.
I've been too busy.
There is, I don't think they're coming tonight, I talked
Something on
to
the website.
the girls, Fireman girls tackle football team won the state championship.
Okay, let's keep some
So
sort
they'll
of
probably
official
come in.
information.
I don't think they're coming tonight, they didn't tell me they're coming tonight.
Maybe the next one.
So hopefully the next one, they're supposed to, I gave them this option tonight, but I didn't hear anything, so I'm assuming it's. So I'm there court, I gave them a few dates, so I haven't heard.
Don't
So
forget about Sherry, does she have any agenda items?
Sherry, any future agenda items?
No, I'm okay.
Okay,
OHB,
Oh, yeah.
Think it's scheduled for our next OHB discussion.
Yes, July 12th.
July 12th.
It will be live Friday.
okay, let's move down to item 2.7.
It's on there.
So Nathan, you wanna drive this one?
Yes.
Find it.
Get to that agenda item. So, we had an unusually wet winter, and throughout the city, we ended up with drainage issues, especially in the subdivisions that abutted, the hillsides. So specifically in your staff report, that Lake Ridge and Lookout Ridge, those two subdivisions, there is at the time they were permitted and approved by the city, drainage easements recorded along the back of all of those parcels. The idea being they were to capture whatever runoff came and then the easements go around their properties. In some instances, it looks like to take it to the street and others to convey it, from the high spot of their property down and back to a street below there. So that's, again, how they were approved. Since with this wet winter, we've had impacts to, two of the homes specifically up there. They're in your memo here that engineering prepared. You'll see the green easements in the staff report. Those are your drainage easements. The blue ones are also drainage easements to convey it either, I think on the one it's taking it to the street, the other, the elevation would seem to be moving it the other direction. So back off of your high parts of your property back to these easements. So what they have, for a variety of reasons, the property owners, when they bought them, the landscaping doesn't necessarily maintain these drainage ways, and so they began to have issues. They've approached about doing some improvements, specifically on the city property that abuts to capture this water and move it around. They have two asks, essentially. One, does the city want to participate financially? And two, can they build these improvements on city property? So outside of ignoring the easements that were recorded and move it back to the city property. So those are really the two questions in front of council. Staff's recommendation again is that these were approved this way. While it wouldn't necessarily be our preferred method to do it, there was nothing incorrect about it, right? The developer, that's what they chose to do. The historic drainage off the properties, and I don't even know if the city owned the property at the time these were done. But that historic flow off the road, or off the mountain, is when the development happens, they have to make provisions for how they allow that natural drainage to continue through or around their parcels, which is, and so the developer in this instance, I don't remember which developer, there's two different
Yeah, there's two different ones.
two different developers, chose to do the easement route. We'll put a drainage easement through here, not a drainage facility. They put an easement saying that whoever developed the property would then continue to allow that water to move through. So, again, while I'm sympathetic to what's happening here, we had this throughout the city where some of these historic developments happened, and you have that sheet flow coming off the side of that mountain. Probably a once in a decade kind of issue. So the staff's recommendation, again, while sympathetic to the owners, is this was supposed to be taken care of as part of that, so that's what we would, again, recommend, but it's up to council.
Council, yeah. Council.
So, I had a question of, why is the request to build drainage on city property rather than build drainage facility material on their own property?
Where the easements
Where the easements already are. I'm confused about that.
I don't wanna speak for them, but I think it's because they've already all landscaped their yards.
If it's appropriate, I can answer the question.
Yeah, but just,
Be able to, I don't know that answer specifically.
be okay, and then come back and forth.
I can guess.
Normally we
but
don't have interaction, so we'll just give you just a minute here, we'll see what we can.
My guess would also be that it's water coming off of the property from the city, but if the property is unimproved, so
We're
it's
not we're not required to maintain that or maintain.
not where we haven't.
It's just natural
Not
flows
where we
of,
haven't constructed anything and it's just natural flow that historically goes.
Where the city can get in trouble is if we do any improvements and divert that water from it. It's a historic flow where the city hasn't done anything to divert it. This was a development that came in, this is a private developer. The city wouldn't have any responsibility or liability related to the stormwater runoff.
I would be afraid if we participated though too, we'd mix for if it landed to happen again.
So that's what. I'm a broken record with,
the precedent word.
Yeah.
right?
Is there, from engineering aspects, is there proper, if they were able to maintain it on their property, is there proper drainage available to street levels or just to our stormwater?
Currently, it would be without pipe, so it would probably need to be some type of constructed to capture the water, put it into a pipe and carry it out to the street, bubble it up. There are easements in those to allow
To
for that,
allow
so
that,
you could go either on this property or on the neighbor's property slightly to make that.
And then, at least in the, is it Lake Ridge? They're 14-foot easements, so they were 7 feet on each side. So, and it's clearly called out as a utility and drainage easement, which is unusual, we don't normally.
We normally do 5 feet each side, so it's a 10-foot total. These ones, you could tell that they were made for drainage and made them a little extra wide.
Was the landscaping in the backyards was not done at time of construction?
During house construction or shortly thereafter.
Shortly
so it
thereafter.
appears to be.
And
not during the subdivision construction.
Just a quick maybe anecdote or comparison, right? So you guys know my neighborhood with flooding issues that we've had over there with the once in 100-year events that happened every other year over the last 10 years, and a lot of us end up with that water coming off of the field. Recognize that there's an issue there, and like my house abuts that. First year we were there, we saw that there was an issue and we're told that house, we didn't build it, the house had gotten water in the basement before us, and I think almost every property owner along that edge. We went and personally paid and dug out a drainage, put pipes in, right, to carry that water from the yard out to the street where it's supposed to go. I mean, I kind of would, personally, I would echo what Nathan, participating financially, I don't think makes sense, precedent, et cetera. The encroachment, that one's maybe a little more palatable, but same thing, we have a lot of encroachment issues. I'd be worried about that precedent. Planned and
The other thing I
designed.
have about that too, look, I don't think, nothing's gonna likely happen up the hill behind them, I don't think there's any it's gonna be hillside, right? So I'm not super worried about this, but the possibility of if something needed to change in the future and it's on city property and we needed to make a change there and they had to remove it, it's still, then you have the drainage problem again, right? And they still have to go back and fix it on personal property or another place, so what I'm worried about is the temporary nature of putting something on city property versus private property. I would hate to have any expenditures go out for a solution that isn't a permanent solution for them. Does that make sense?
Cause problems later.
Yeah.
These plats were all recorded in public record for any, if like I was gonna buy that lot, I'd pull this on my,
Illegal subdivisions that are recorded.
so Tida would have pulled all this one.
Yeah, I'm just wondering,
I highly doubt anybody pointed it out to them when they were buying.
Agreed.
It's
Yeah,
probably
of
in
course not, right.
in that stack of 100 signatures you're signing, you're buying, there's probably a statement in there, says, oh, by the way, you have an easement. But again, it's the way it probably wouldn't be the preferred, but I'm not even sure the city would have had legal,
To change it, probably.
the legal ability to require the developer to
require
do anything different. In Utah, I mean,
Yeah.
kind of a different situation we saw with Draper, they have that issue, they had to allow the homes, and then as soon as they start having problems, well, the city approved it, we have no authority to deny. In this, I think if they could prove, hey, when we've done this, I think we were probably stuck, even though this was done in like '08.
One was done, yeah, one was 2015. The property above was owned by another private owner who's deeded to the city for 18 years. This wasn't city property.
So we do end up with a lot of property that we just get given, as council's aware, from developers who just quit claim. It feels like sometimes they give us the properties that are maybe challenging or have challenges that all of a sudden they just show up as ours, for us to maintain. So we've had another issue with some flooding recently where the first statement out was the city's property. We're like, what property are you talking about? And we had been given a 10-foot strip in between their properties. They thought they'd given us all the property. For some reason, the storm drain retention, it's over in Teton, the pond was higher than the surrounding, so it doesn't work. They have to fix that. But luckily it wasn't ours. We tell them, this isn't ours, you still own this. But that happens regularly. It actually brings up another point where we may wanna come back and, I don't know if we can, but require warranty deeds instead of these quick claim deeds where we don't know they happen until they're done. They just all of a sudden show up one day and say, hey, this property's all yours and you owe back taxes.
So what, like, the staff report says there's a proposal to build a facility, like, what are we talking about?
Yeah, so we met with the property owners, the contractor with them, went up and walked the site. What they were proposing was to do like a drainage ditch along the back of their properties, on city property, down to a collection point, then put it in a pipe through their property out to the street. So those would have been the facilities they're talking about.
So, basically a ditch to take it to.
Water to a collection basin of some sort and then pipe it out through their property to the road.
Engineered and
So we asked them to submit a plan, a formal plan to review, and I don't know that we've ever received one.
So I didn't see any.
Yeah.
Detail in the report.
I'm gonna guess to that point, I'd be more open if there's an engineered.
and it's not, I mean, you're,
Just thinking out loud.
it's just a ditch,
It's a ditch rather than a constructed.
then a catch
Something.
basin or
Yeah.
something, yeah.
Not installing pumps and all, crazy
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Would
I
it
mean,
be
I
all right
could
if we
get
hear
towards
from,
that, yeah.
could we hear from the
Yeah.
resident about kind of the answer to that question from early on and
You bet.
get some feedback? Everybody opposed to that?
You got just a couple minutes, you wanna add something?
Sure.
Tell us your name, first of all.
Chad.
You are Chad.
Chad Solis. I'm the lower lot in Lake Ridge. So we've actually flooded from this scenario 3 times in 6 years. And our land is actually properly graded for it, or at least for retaining water that should come to our property. But we had a river of water for a day and a half going down the side of our house, ended up flooding our basement, which again, we're solving that problem separately. It filled we have a pool under construction, it filled that pool 3 times. And continued that river for a day and a half down the side of our property. You were right, Nathan, when we were never disclosed that we were responsible for this drainage. It was also, the prior owner never did anything to accommodate for that, which feels to me if that is the engineering process, that when he built the home, there should have been some sort of, I don't know what you guys call it, certification or some sort of validation that they accommodate, because we have a large mountainside and in Lake Ridge, and Lookout, they plan for drainage on the south end of Lake Ridge, they plan for drainage on the north end, but there is no drainage for the middle, which is a big mountain, I don't know which peak or whatever it's called, but right behind our house and Richard's house, who's the neighbor above us, there's no drainage accounted for, it just comes right down, starts at Richard's house and makes its way to my house. So, there is I think the engineering planned for most of it, but there's a significant oversight in on one of the particular slopes. And so, while this was a big snow year, we have had it 3 of 6 years. This year was obviously the worst. This is the first year we've had a river coming down the side of our house, but every year, our third tier, I don't know if you can see it in the drawing I submitted, but our third tier, which is 40 feet by 150 feet, and it's grades away from our house, is always full of water in the spring. This year just overflowed and then came down to our second tier, which overflowed, which then started the river down our property line.
So two questions. We have your email and all of that in the packet. So the 2 questions that we'd asked, one, why is there a need to put it on city property versus where the easements are?
Yeah, so on that one, you were all right in some fashion. Richard Yard's finished landscaping and he has a fence all the way to his property line. My yard is unfinished at that particular place, but it seemed like the most logical place to capture the entire run in one kind of motion, and then use my property as an exit out to the street, because we actually already have a dry creek bed on that west, kind of northwest side of the
See
property.
this between the properties.
So the
yeah.
drainage would grab both your property, that ditch we're considering would
Yeah.
grab both properties.
Convey the water to your property and out that, along
Yes,
that place that's already there.
correct.
Is that road, is that a road behind the property of Richard's house? just a dirt road, or is it sloped for the fence, or how's that look?
It's just, you mean the clearing
Yeah,
behind the fence?
just to the west of his property.
Like, skid steers and stuff go back there enough, they've just kind of destroyed the vegetation.
But it's fairly flat.
Like, you can get a skid steer back there.
So then the second question was, has an engineered plan been done?
I don't believe it's been like engineered and like passed and like an inspection. Our contractor put it together, I think in partnership with, or at least submitted it to the Harriman engineers.
But we're
And-
saying we don't have anything?
I haven't seen a
We've not
plan.
received anything?
Yeah, the contractor said he had Blake and Nathan's emails, I think, and we asked him to just send it to them.
I saw a quote,
Yeah, the quote
dollar
was all
quote,
I
but
saw.
I haven't seen it actually.
The reason we're asking is just that is, at least for me, the question is, if we, allowing an encroachment on city property is an issue because there's a lot of them, where people are basically just taking,
Sure.
and we're actually going and making them rip stuff out.
Yeah.
So this would be counter to what we're doing, and our attorney
In other
probably
areas.
make him not too happy. And the second, I mean, kind of the second part of that is what makes the most sense. Like I think we all are sympathetic to the plight, but at the same time, I describe my neighborhood. We live out where it's relatively flat, and we all get flooded because rain comes down and it pools on the farmland and runs right into our houses. And we've all dealt with floods several times and dealt with it ourselves, sort of thing. So how do we go back to all these people to find out that we helped with this? So having an engineered plan and knowing what the option is. Okay, if we were to do it, allow it on city property, here's what it would be, and we could see the scope of, is it limited enough that we feel good about that, or is it too much and we need to require them to push some more onto their property?
Yeah.
Yeah, cause I think there's the individual property and there's unintended consequences that none of us can know about what might happen to adjacent properties, right? What I would feel much better about knowing that there was a engineered solution for these properties, that it wouldn't be conveying water anywhere else, that it would be, the nature of the construction or things to be done on city property. If it's just a ditch being dug along, 200 feet here or whatever it is, it's not the
I
end of
wanna
the
know
world
what the
kind of thing,
scope
but
of that would be,
Yeah.
right? So would
There's
that
gonna have to
just
be
be,
some structural on that bottom side to catch the.
would
Yeah,
it just be
they-
along the one property line and then it's a relatively small basin and the pipe goes through the other property, or we're gonna try to take it all on the city side? Like,
Yeah,
wanna know,
so-
before we say, yeah, have
think
them
we
look
need
at
to see a
that,
plan, yeah.
we
So I
need to
can-
more,
I'll
see
send
more
you-
detail.
I'll make sure I'll just use the same thread I've been using and I'll get you guys, I'll have them engineer it. There's 3 catch basins, along the path. And they're concrete, so we're not just like digging it out and putting some cellophane down and some rocks, like concrete basins to properly catch them and divert the water, and then ultimately a 10-inch pipe from the top of my property out to the street. That's the short
And
version.
if that's on city property, who's gonna be responsible for maintaining that and making sure those catch basins in the spring don't get filled with debris and blocked off and then backed up and then really flood?
Ultimately, I'd probably say me, because I'm the one that gets the most impact from it. Richard's safe at that point, it's down by me.
I guess the question is,
Go ahead.
It's not uncommon for the cities to obligate adjoining property owners under some sort of an agreement and then record that against the property, so that way, if they ever do sell the property, the next owner has notice, at least on title, that there's gonna be a
The same as the
responsibility.
And if it's not maintained and it floods the next
Yeah.
property down, then they are
Right.
liability, not
Yep.
ours.
Yeah,
And
that would have to be a provision.
if they don't maintain it, which is potentially a problem, is that the city can go in and then charge the fees that we go in to fix the issue and put it as a lien on the property, which is not the ideal way, but we do have that backup provision in case it's not being maintained.
There's some ways that we could work.
So,
I think for an engineered plan, we're gonna wanna see a little bit of ecology work done. Because if we're gonna collect some water, put it in a pipe,
You know, the
and
volume,
we undersize anything, we're gonna create a bigger problem.
that's my concern as well.
Really what, speaking for myself, what I'm looking for with that is minimal impact on city property, right? Some would call them A, some would call them B. We're willing to look at it, but that doesn't mean, alright, let's put it all in the city property, it doesn't change.
I think there's let's just call it the good neighbor principle of saying, let's, I think we wanna reasonably do what we can do to help accommodate your property from having your basement flood, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I think that's a reasonable thing to do, but as for the nature of what that involves yet, I think that's unknown for us, and so it's hard to give any real feedback other than get us the details so we can make the decision, you know?
The toughest thing is I know those details cost money, and I would like to see it detailed on private property, and then it can always move to city property if it's an approved plan or an
That's
approved
exactly
agreement.
where I'm going with this, is
Yeah.
I'd like, says, really, if you're gonna spend the money to do this, you should look at both, cause us saying we're willing to consider it doesn't mean we're gonna do it.
Another potential issue is that we have an active code enforcement case against
Yeah.
a charge, cause they have quite a bit of encroachment on city property. And so we would probably need to address that along the way, especially if there's gonna be engineered plans. That's the only reason why I bring it up.
Just know, if this were a one-off, right? This is the only place that have this, I think it would be a lot easier for us, but
Or not the
there are a lot of
outstanding
other issues
issues.
that whatever
40
decision we make
40-something
here
encroachments.
affects a lot of other things we're dealing with too.
40 major encroachments or something like that around the city that we're dealing with, so.
so I think, let me try to, cause I'm trying to move us along. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, in consensus, I think we're all in agreement we can't participate in the
Financial
recovery, that's
aspect,
just
yeah.
finance, just, I mean, that's again, but we're open to working, if you'll work with our staff, you know, as far as, and then come back with some plans, I think we'll be open to looking at your options and trying to help out.
As far as using the land?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So keep working with them, they'll keep working, we've got awesome staff that can help guide.
But I think I would reiterate the point that I think both of you made is that I think our recommendation would be that the engineering plan should primarily focus on the improvements being on private property instead of the city property. If that is for some reason specifically untenable or impossible, if that can be identified and explained why there would need to be an exception to that, that would help us as well.
Okay, yeah, we can do that. Just so I understand, so the city is of the belief that residents are responsible for the runoff of an entire mountainside when they've planned for it in other aspects of this neighborhood. I just wanna make,
I'll
on the
leave it to
record, I wanna understand that.
engineer and attorney to answer that question.
I'll rephrase it a little bit differently, is that the city's not responsible for stormwater runoff when the city hasn't changed the historical flows of that runoff. And that's in the Governmental Immunities Act.
And isn't there a state mandate of any property owner, I don't think it distinguishes between government or residential, that they're responsible for the runoff of their property?
Not the natural historic flows of the runoff. There's lots of case law on it, and something that I've had to look into, especially since being here, because we've had some potential issues with that, but.
Is it, as a resident that is apparently responsible for the runoff of a mountainside, that is a massive burden that was never disclosed in any fashion. And especially feels negligent, again, no one of this room, cause I don't think anyone was here when that was engineered and approved, and the economy was not very great, and so decisions like the Draper decision were made to allow, cause that whole Lake Ridge subdivision specifically is all landfill as well, very similar to that Draper situation. And so I know decisions were made by others, not you guys, but that feel negligent. In that they planned over here, they planned over here. Those dry creek beds were flowing all spring, but nothing for the middle. And so that feels negligent to me in the approvals of the prior administration of the city. It feels like there's more that the city can do to help us here.
Well, and I say I sympathize with your feeling about it, right? But from all the information that we can see here, it looks like there were plans and easements recorded on the property to handle it. There's places for that stormwater to be appropriately routed around
Sure.
the properties.
Shouldn't there have been like a certification of the prior homeowner before occupancy? Cause there's inspections of gas lines, there's inspections of all other kinds of components. It feels like if you put that burden on a resident, that should have been part of an inspection process when it's as substantial as a mountain that is sitting behind you. Is that a fair statement?
My
Well,
only response to that could be that our legislature, the state legislature that makes the laws that handcuff us, are very developer friendly. And don't allow us to do a lot of things you just said. I'll reiterate what Steve said. Totally sympathize. I've mentioned a few times. Myself, my neighbors' houses have been flooded. Exact same situation, exact same feelings. And exact same result for me and many of my neighbors.
I think for us as a council, this is where the heart says one thing. I mean, I don't mean to be cheesy, but the heart's saying one thing.
Sure.
Right.
Legally, it's saying another, if that makes sense. So,
It would be tough for us to know when that landscaping goes in, when the drainage goes in, and hold back occupancy for you not to be able to move into your home without your backyard being done, and $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 have to be put into that or more, and you can't live in your house. And that's where the state says you only have to X to the landscape to the front corner or the back fence or however. So there's a lot of.
And it doesn't help the feeling, but stop me if I'm going astray, but the way I interpret the legal part of it is that if I'm a property owner and I build my house in where I did in the field, I'm disturbing the natural flow. And it's my responsibility to take care of that natural flow that I've disturbed. Is that
Yeah, and if the city were to go behind your house and like it was mentioned, it's not likely or probable, but if we were to develop that land, then we would be obligated to address the stormwater at that time. Not while it's been a mountain, it will,
in
Yeah,
its
Yeah.
natural
in
state?
its natural state.
that's
yeah.
well, I think that's well said, Jerry.
As far as the certificate of occupancy statement, I think we all sympathize you and the legislature has tied our hands. And it specifically states in code that we cannot deny a building permit or a certificate of occupancy unless it's violating a building code or fire code violation. That's it. We can't stop it because your front yard landscaping is not done or maybe it violates some other code violation. It's one of the things that has been frustrating on my end and that they keep doing things like that, so.
And just to point out, the legislature in recent sessions has advanced bills that would have taken away cities' rights of inspections completely. If you're wondering, I mean, no inspections at all by cities. There would be an engineered plan and they stamp it and that's all there is.
That's a topic for another day. I have a pool contractor that has cost me $100,000 by the loopholes in the state licensing and permitting process, so this just adds to my.
May I have a quick comment?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks for being there, Chad. This is Sherry. And I completely sympathize with the situation you're dealing with. I think we all do. It's quite possible that the first owners of your house just simply built a trench around there. The unfortunate thing is that after the next owners come in and they see that and they want to landscape over that without really understanding that that was intended for this easement for drainage. And so there's a lack of good communication. Obviously, there's probably easements on your deeds and things like that buried about 100 pages down through the pages you sign as you're closing your house. So Nathan, I think, mentioned it when he first was introducing this, how he said, you know, this is probably not the way that we would even prefer to do it. I think that in the past, these kind of situations happen much more frequently than they do now. Even though our hands are tied with legislative type of things, I think our engineering staff is very thorough on trying to figure out how to address those issues so that things get put in place in the front instead of putting a ditch in and hoping it doesn't get landscaped over. But it's allowed, and here we are. And so then we just have to figure out the best way forward. So I would just echo what everyone said as far as I think it's appropriate for you to try and design this on your own property, but as a good neighbor and stewards and trying to address a situation that you unknowingly got into, I think that we can look at, is there a proper way to do this in partnership with you?
Oh, we appreciate it, Chad. Sorry, it's not a better answer, so.
Honest, figured as much, but, thank you for your time.
We didn't have to wait till 10:30 or 11.
Thank you for moving, thank you for moving it up, appreciate it.
Appreciate it, Chad, thank you. Okay, move on to 2.1 then, which, are Justin, you driving it, Kyle?
I am.
Kyle's gonna drive
I'll do
this.
the intro.
Okay.
So just really quickly, as you know, the city retained Bowen Collins and Associates to do a water rate study update. They're also working on our water master plan also. So tonight, Keith Larson with Bowen and Collins will be discussing the different tier structures and some recommendations on that. Staff has also asked Keith to put in some detail based off of the May 4th meeting to discuss why a possible rate increase is needed. Keep in mind that Bowen Collins and staff are still working on the water master plan portion, so they don't necessarily have specific project details at this point, but that will be coming at a later meeting. This is just the first step in getting the tiers and the rates discussed a little bit. So Keith, I'll turn it over to you.
Welcome, Keith.
Excellent, thank you. Good, fantastic. I understand we have a really packed agenda, so I'm gonna go as fast as I possibly can, and you need to slow me down if I'm going too fast, all right? So, what we're gonna do, we're gonna just briefly touch on what you talked about on May 4th. We're gonna look at a couple of different changes to your rate structure that we would recommend. And the real goal of this meeting is to get just some basic feedback for us, so that when we come back in a couple of months here,
August, September.
that we get you as close to the answer that you're looking for as possible. I could give you, 8 million iterations, but if we can narrow it down, that will help us out. Okay, so I think you saw this graph previously. Just a quick reminder, the bars are expected costs, the lines are expected revenues. The most important one is that top black line, which includes your expected impact fees. And there's three big takeaways from this. Number one, in 2022, we saw a big drop in our sales associated with conservation and reduced water use. Hooray for conservation, not so great for finances, right? Also in 2023, what we're seeing is a bounce back as we sell additional water. The problem is those our costs were down a little bit, but with inflation, we're bumping back up in 2023. Expenses are increasing. Our project costs are also going up, and so we have this double whammy. Revenue's down, expenses are up. And then the last thing to take away here is obviously that the black line is a lot lower than the top of those green lines, which means we're not bringing enough revenue to cover our expected costs. And I think that's essentially what Kyle covered on May 4th. Okay, so the question is, one question that we always get is, well, okay, you just threw up a bunch of bars on there. Is that the right level of funding? Is there a way that we could spend less? So one thing that we went in and we looked at is what is the value of your system, and $750 million in your water system. How long is that expected to last? And here's a couple of ranges of design lives for your facilities. And by dividing your value by the design life, you can get a pretty good idea of what you should be spending in terms of capital on a yearly basis. And you can see that ranges from about 8 million a year to about $13 million a year. So our operation and maintenance costs are fairly well fixed, but we can vary our capital costs, and our recommendation is about 8 to 13. Question here.
So is this is capital costs for the existing system?
Is capital
This
costs
is not including me adding it.
just for the existing system right now, yeah. So remember those numbers, average is about 9.8. Okay, so then we look at, as Kyle mentioned, we are in the middle of the master plan, but we've kind of got some draft results based on previous efforts. And we're looking at about $93 million that needs to be spent in the next 10 years. So you divide that by 10 and we end up to about 9.3.
Just wanna make sure, this is culinary and secondary water combined?
Correct.
Good. In your analysis, would you divide those into two separate categories? Please, yes.
Secondary versus.
Secondary improvement needs and culinary
Okay.
improvement needs.
Yeah, Kyle, can you take some notes for me? Yeah, excellent. Yes, you do kind of run it as a joint fund there, but we can break it out for clarification. Great. Okay, so we're at 9.32, which is kind of a similar number that we're looking at. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken that first chart and I have thrown on that range of 8 million to 13 million. That is the green band up at the top of this. And what you can see is that at the current proposed budget, we're actually, right on the lower end of that. We actually drift below what that recommended sustainable level of funding is out 7-8 years. But I believe there will probably be some ongoing maintenance and repair projects that will fill that little bit up. But the point of this is, if you look at this, the plan that we have in place right now looks pretty consistent with what that sustainable level of funding is when we look at the overall value of the system. Okay, I'm gonna pause there. Good? Okay, so I think Kyle talked to you about 3 different increases or alternatives. My understanding was that from the feedback received, that alternative 3, to kind of smooth that out as much as we could, perhaps use a little bonding, would be probably preferred alternative, at least out of these 3. And so the rest of the presentation I've structured around that alternative 3, the gradual increase.
The problem I have with that is we don't know what we're paying for.
Sure.
Does that make sense? Is that we've had recent discussions about the value of secondary water systems and investing in secondary water systems. And if there's $90 million of improvements that are made and half of that is secondary water, we might decide that there's a different strategy to go forward because we may want to do less or none of that, for example. That could be a possibility going forward. That would definitely impact whether or not we had a bond. It would be whether or not it would be gradual. It could be a smaller initial increase and an even slower gradual. I mean,
Or whether it's a bond and no.
right, yeah, it could be lots of different things. And so, although I appreciate the effort being put into the presentation and the probably right assumption based on the information you have on alternative 3, I'm not sure that that's exactly the way that we will go.
And absolutely, I'm not asking you to make a decision today. I'm trying to narrow it down to the best options. And I also appreciate that idea that as this goes through, we'll provide more detail and clarity in that.
So I'll just piggyback on what Steve just said. And that's, as soon as we went to this, I thought the exact same thing. Like, now, everything you're gonna show me though, I'm gonna kind of discount or even throw out of my mind, because what if we go a different route on secondary? So we kind of need to see.
But even on that, I mean, the presentation, you still get the base idea of what the need is.
I'm not saying don't go
Yeah,
through
yeah,
it,
right.
I'm just
Yeah.
saying, just know that's kind of how I'm viewing it.
Well,
I think it would just change the scale. It's not going to change that operating, the basic
O&M,
premise
so,
where we're at, that our costs.
We're short of where we
increase.
need to be. We gotta figure out how to close the gap.
Get it.
Totally get it.
well,
Seems like we've heard that story.
Yeah.
and the other thing I
accounted
will
for
tell
now.
you is that if we don't invest in the secondary side, that does result in additional costs on the culinary side. Now, whether they're one-to-one, we can talk about that later, but I think ultimately that sustainable level of funding is where you're going to need to be in the long term. Whether there's some intermediate steps along the way that we could maybe make it a little more gradual or something like that would be.
Question, Kyle, is a bond the preferred way to minimize impact on?
I mean, grants would of course be the best way because we don't have to
Yeah,
pay
we
those
don't
back,
have to pay,
but
correct, yeah.
historically, bonding has been at a lower interest rate. It's also more palatable for the residents because, and they're not seeing a 30 or 40% rate increase. And then there's also the generational fairness concept that really, this is gonna be a 40-year project.
So why would this generation pay for it
Right,
upfront?
all the generations should participate.
Thanks for that.
This last slide just shows what that increase would do, if we did the 10-10-10-10. It kind of, that gets us up to basically that sustainable level of funding and chases it out that way. So we're gonna change to, here's the cash flow, that goes with that. By doing that, we keep within the target, fund. Without any change and with the current capital budget, we would basically run the fund out of money by the end of 2024. So we gotta do something, whether it's increases or changing our capital. Okay, so I think we talked about all that. Let's keep moving. All right, so I'm gonna switch gears a little bit. That was kind of the big picture revenue needs. Now the question becomes, okay, so as we structure these new rates, the way in which we collect, regardless of the magnitude, may need some changes. So let's talk about those for just a second. So my understanding as I met with Justin and Kyle of the goals of this is to, number one, we need to generate the revenue we need to fund the system. We do want to encourage prudent use of water. We would like to simplify the rate structure. I gotta tell you, Harriman has the most complicated rate structure I've seen in 3 dozen clients over the last 5-6 years here. So anyway, we're gonna try to simplify.
Of course we
that.
do.
Thanks for that.
Is there
Okay.
an award for that?
You know, as we got into this, we kept getting surprised.
Yeah. We want to equitably, as much as possible, and it's tough to get it perfect, but we want to equitably allocate our costs. And to do that, we'll look at your base rates, your volume rates, and your volume tiers. And then the other thing that I got out of the conversation was that secondary and culinary rates should encourage, but not force, secondary use for those that have it available. So that was another one of the goals that we had. Okay, so we came up with 4 major recommendations. They're listed here, they're in your packet, but we're gonna talk about each of them, so let's do that. Okay, so the first one is we would recommend that there be some slight adjustments to how you do your tiers. So the way this chart reads is the amount of water that you use is on the x-axis, and on the y-axis is how much is being paid for each of those gallons. So you can see that, you know, for the Harrimans are in the red. So you can see that for the first, is that 5,000 gallons, you get charged, you know, whatever that is, $1.70 or so. And then it jumps up at 5, and then jumps up at 10 again, and so on and so forth. You can see some of the comparable entities around here also shown there. So why does the cost jump up? Well, basically, because we have systems in which we peak in the summertime, the more water you use in the summer, the greater the impact on infrastructure. We have to make our pipes bigger, we have to turn on more expensive sources, we have to add storage. all of that means we have to pay more for the more people use and put on their property specifically. So that's the concept of increasing blocks. So you look at all that and you say, well, how do we know what's right? You know, what's the right thing to do there? So what we've done is we do two things. Number one is we take your rates and we divide them by the cost of your tier 1 water or your block 1 water. And that allows us to normalize it to, you see 1 over on the left-hand side here. And then we can see what the other tiers are as a portion of that first tier. Why we do that is that allows us to compare your rates to somebody else, anywhere else, to see what that ratio is in terms of base use and maximum use. We take those other dozens of studies we've done and we do an analysis, a cost of service analysis, which says how much does it cost to serve those upper amounts of water. And what that gives us is this gray envelope, which is the range of cost of service to actually provide water. So when we look at this, we look at your blocks and we see that the first couple are okay, but as we get into the higher ranges, we are actually charging less for that water than it is actually costing to provide. So what does that do? What does that mean? That means that the bottom water users are actually providing a subsidy for those who are using large amounts of water.
Wow.
So,
Does this take into consideration admin, all the costs associated with the water system from billing, collecting, or is this just the source of water?
this is, help me understand your question a little bit better.
So is it the total water department, O&M cost, all the costs associated with providing culinary, secondary water to the resident? Or is it just a tertiary cost of like, say Rocky Mountain Power only has 3.8 cents to produce you power, but
It's a little bit of both. However, what I'll tell you, this is volume rate, so the amount you pay per drop of water. You also pay a base rate, fixed rate every month.
connection fee, yeah.
And that amount is what covers most of those administrative type costs.
Okay.
So this is primarily the
Use of water.
use of water,
Okay.
yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna let that sink in for a second. We're gonna talk about another item, then we're gonna come back to this really quick. Okay, so the other question is not only, what should those stair steps look like, but where should the steps occur? So where should we have our blocks occur? So this is a representation of your residential water use, and you can see we have the average and median user, the 25th, 75th, and 90th percentile users. So what jumps out at us from this is that tier 6 is really too high to have much influence on very many of your customers. It's 20% higher than the 90th percentile user in the highest month of use of water. And so we would suggest that you bring that down a little bit so that it becomes more relevant to more of your customers. The other small adjustment is we would suggest you bump that tier 4-5 break up just a little bit. And that is to give a little smoother transition as we go up, providing that messaging along for residents. And so what that ends up being is, you can see the lines that we would recommend, bringing down the top 10 and the 4-5 tier up 5. Okay, so if we do that, here's what we end up with. We're recommending that we take both a shift in the tiers and then increase the blocks in terms of their ratio to tier 1. And we would recommend that your structure looks something like the dashed red line. Now again, this is just unit costs. So once we decide what the total value is, we can calculate out the dollars. But regardless of where that total amount ends up, we would still recommend making.
This is ratio of tier cost to the base cost.
That's right.
Got it.
That's right. So,
I
go ahead.
what percentage are we of people, of users that are going over the 60,000? Because it almost feels to me like that top 5 to 6 should even come down to 60,000. It's way too much. We have to allow these tiers to also drive habits, and you shouldn't be using 70,000 gallons a month. You're overwatering. And so I wouldn't be opposed at all to even see that 5 to 6 break come down to 60 and try and see if we can't curb some behavior.
So, I would be willing to support that concept from a cost of service standpoint. We can revise that to figure that out. That is sending a more aggressive signal in terms of conservation. Just from a public policy standpoint, my general recommendation is to take incremental steps. So that's kind of up to you. It's not a cost of service issue, more of a public
That was
policy.
my first thought was, we're going to be increasing costs fairly dramatically. I don't wanna necessarily punish them on top of it. We can make measured changes over time.
I would say though, when you're looking at a 90th percentile user using 3 times, almost 3 times what the median user is using in a month, that's a lot.
Put it in perspective though, I have a large yard compared to the townhouse you're comparing me to. Right? And water's gonna cost me more, and we'll go into the numbers of how much more. I'm gonna wanna make some changes anyway. But I'm worried about the sticker shock, public policy. We're gonna raise costs a ton already. And then in those couple of months, it will come as a surprise when they go over that get kind of kicked in the teeth.
So you're saying maybe gradually get to that
I
60.
like his idea of incremental changes, right? So
It's smoother.
this adjustment is bringing it in line with kind of our use right now.
Right.
And we're talking about restructuring the rest of the costs and fees. We're gonna increase things dramatically already. So correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm interpreting you saying is we're suggesting some of these changes to bring things in line. And then you can come back and make some of these changes over time to try to change behavior.
Yeah, yes. And these are two perfectly legitimate points of view. But I think that is a good point, that if you're increasing rates significantly, any change like this, there will be some winners and losers, right? The big water users they're gonna hit that. Let's just say we have the 10% increase, just for fun. And then you're gonna take that breakdown, they're gonna end up seeing, 15-20% increases on their bills. So I think we just need to be cognizant that there will be some impacts.
Well, they were being subsidized for the last 20 years by the lower payers. Do we have a heat map of water source or usage of the city? Like, what type of housing, what type of development uses more water? To like Jared's point, like the bigger lots, does everybody in that subdivision use more water than, say,
In general,
Airman Town Center?
in general, yes, the larger lots are going to use more water, particularly in the summer.
Right. Okay.
Look at your general plan.
Like my general plan, yeah.
Just change those color codes,
Yeah.
right?
And it's comparatively, so if I have half acre or an acre or whatever, which we have, not just there's not very many newer ones, like my neighborhood, but Old Harriman, right next to me. There's a lot of larger lots that use it, and it's those couple of months in the summer, right, they're large. Then the rest of the year, not so much, and it's.
As much
I
as I
wanna
agree with
adjust it
you, I
over
would say,
time, I don't wanna kick them in the teeth all at once.
but I would put it this way. The percentage may sound dramatic, but if you're talking about a percentage on a $60 a month water bill,
In the summer, it's not $60.
that's what I'm trying to say is I don't know what the average water bill is. I know what usage is, I just don't know what that translates into what it is. Like that 90th
I'll
percentile,
tell you,
like
my
that
wa-
90th percentile guy, if he's got a $500 a month bill and we raise it 20%, there's an extra $100, right?
Ding,
Holy
ding,
crap. That's what I'm saying.
That's what it is.
You're over 200, I'm over 200.
So one thing I will do once
I'm 400
we
plus in the
we discuss the financial part, we know what the structure is. I'll provide you example
Okay.
bills,
That would be great.
saying this is the average, this is a high water user, this is a townhouse condo, so
Yeah, if you could
we'll-
have the value of those median average, yeah, 90%.
we'll see that down the road a little bit.
So
There's a
yeah,
lot of reasons for that. The system's
Right.
not been great.
The tiers in our last rate study were based on water use. And so as you can see, our overall water use for those high users is coming down already, right? Just over conservation. So those tiers were set based on water use at that time in 2019. And so we're starting to see it come down. So in the next 3 or 4 years, if conservation continues, we will probably see those tiers
those
continue
tiers
to drop.
Makes sense.
Do we have a summer and winter rate schedule? Does it differ, or is it the
No,
same
It's
cost?
the same.
Yeah, it's based on conservation, so the more you use, the more you pay per thousand gallons.
This is all I know. I've been sitting at a water conference for 3 days, and we have to talk serious about water. We have to start considering the real cost of water. And I understand exactly what you're talking about sticker shock and things like that. But the fact of the matter is we have a water shock coming, and we have to start curbing behavior. And I think that people have started to do a good job of being more and more aware of water. And so I definitely don't want to throw them under the bus about that type of thing. But I don't think that people really understand the true cost of water. And I think that we have to put in rate structures like this that have to curtail that kind of use, because we just simply don't have the source. And this year we do. But this is not going to be a trend that continues, most likely, to where we have 200% of average coming in the form of snowfall. It's just not going to happen. Most likely. I'm not a fortune teller, but my guess is it's not going to happen. And it's just that I hate to say, let's keep it there, because it's going to be another several years then before we come back and readjust it. And I just feel like we have to start moving towards addressing the real cost of water, so people will start understanding the finite resource it is and better uses of it.
Chair, I'm not against the concept, I'm just wanting to say we need to be cautious and actually look at the numbers.
So
Yeah.
I have a suggestion.
I agree with you.
If we don't go too crazy, I could probably give you 2 options. One at this, and then maybe a more aggressive. And then when Kyle runs the comparisons, you could decide how whatever.
Yeah,
How
great.
how
Yeah,
better
I
ways.
also think we can build into a policy that as we change things like this, I don't want a resident to come in and go, why is my bill $1,500 this month? I had no idea that you guys were gonna change these structures. And so maybe we build into it some sort of a one-time forgiveness or something like that, so that we build into some sort of retraining for people to understand that, yeah, here's how it's gonna happen, here's how it's gonna change. But I just need people to start being more aware.
So the last couple things that I have should be pretty quick. What about users with secondary? We would recommend that for users who have access to secondary, that you take the same blocks, whatever they are, and you bump them up a little bit to provide a premium for those who are choosing not to use secondary. That's similar to what you do today, but we would recommend that process
I
continue.
have to be the squeaky wheel on this one too. So we recently put secondary into my neighborhood. It's from a well that is, gosh, I don't know, how many feet in elevation change is
There. Yeah, the water pressure, especially in yours, is lower on your cul-de-sac for
it?
sure.
Right, so I don't use secondary because the pressure's terrible. My sprinklers don't work. So I'm paying for secondary already. I have no choice, I have to pay the fee and I don't use it because it doesn't work. And then you're gonna penalize me even more because I'm not using something that doesn't work.
See, I'm not opposed to this rate structure, but there has to be consideration if we are building that out or timeline about putting a pump or pressurized system or something. There's gonna be some nuances on that, building that, if we continue to build out secondary. So I think it's gotta be part of the discussion. But if you have working secondary, it's operable and pressurized, and you don't take advantage of it, that's where the schedule. So it wouldn't be on your neighborhood yet, I would assume, but
Well, this would be for everybody.
true, we'd have to figure out, I think it'd have to be more dissected than just everybody that has secondary will pay this extra fee if they don't use it.
So just
Yeah.
something to think about. I mean, on paper analytically, makes sense, but in practice, there's a bit of a disconnect.
Sure. Sure.
So, that's all I'll say, but
Lauren will go out there with a bike pump.
The other thing that we have in here, is basically that we would just take the secondary blocks and align them with the new, culinary blocks, however that works out. So, the one thing that you'll notice, the proposed structure is 0 to 5, there's only 5 tiers, cause we basically take off that bottom tier 1, which is used almost exclusively for indoor. So it's a pretty easy shift there. Okay, the one other thing that we would recommend is that you make some adjustments for your larger meters. As we've looked at it, you don't have a whole lot of these larger meters specifically on either specific outdoor irrigation or secondary meters. But what you can see, like for this 2-inch meter, you can see even the median user, which in the residential is down, peaks out in tier 3, is all the way up into tier 5 here. Doesn't sound like real, a lot of people are not gonna be real fans of giving large meter users more water. But just from an equity and fairness standpoint, we would recommend that you align those a little bit better. Provide more equitable costs for all your customers. So if we do that, we can follow AWWA, that's American Water Works Association capacity ratios, and we can even those out a little. Oh, very good, very good. And those do represent increases to what they get today, but I'm recommending that as, I think, the right thing to do. Okay, and then the very last thing is, because you have all these different customer classes, we went through it, there's a few things that we can trim out. I don't need to talk details, but we can cut the schedule down quite a bit. Okay, I think I got to the end. Kyle and Justin, did we get the direction we need?
I think so, yeah, I think we're in a good spot.
Anything
I have
else?
one more question.
Yeah.
What about, where's the tier structure for the new Olympia Hills development? Cause obviously they're coming in on tier 2 water from the wholesale supplier, so will there be a separate rate structure for them?
Yeah, there will be a separate rate structure for them. The tiers will be similar, it'll just be the rates will just be higher to cover the increased cost of the water source.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, we appreciate it, Keith.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for being here. It's good. Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
work. Yes.
You bet.
Okay, we're gonna fly through 2.3. Can we try to knock out from some of this? Can we go to 2.3 real fast?
Can you pull that up, John?
Are we okay? Have to try to be as fast as you wanna make. 2.4 will be fast too. I wanted to do 2.3 and 2.4 before.
Where's the clicker?
Okay.
Mayor, I need an hour for mine.
Yours got rescheduled.
Okay.
I vote we continue his item.
Oh, it's just close.
Todd, you keep your 2.9.
Wow.
He tries.
Performance and
So we asked
Where's the
Friends of
bailiff?
Harriman to send us their budget request as we're working on our budgets. You have this in your packet. These are additional programs and services that they are interested in providing outside of what we had budgeted for already for the next year's budget. So that gives you some idea. I sent this to you earlier today. And I don't have any more information than this on what these programs are, what the revenue would be coming in from some of these programs, if they're going to do like a registration fee. and this is what Kyle and I came to, when looking at what has already been budgeted, removing potential revenues, the sound rental, and then factoring back in a sound tech. So this is for you to discuss. Any questions? I thought they were gonna be here, but they're not, so,
I texted Chris earlier too, I didn't hear back.
so,
So you're saying they're requesting this much in
In
additional to what we normally do?
well, they had requested the entire 165 for 50,
So the 165 is basically last year's plus all this.
yes.
Plus
Yes.
the one, so they're at 2 something. I don't think we're there right now. It's not. I mean, I love what they're doing, I think they're running.
Great ideas.
I think they're running where we
Yeah, they're doing-
anticipated
they're
a
doing some
jog
really
and
great
walk
things.
to get this started.
But the idea is that they find funding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the thing about it is that, and we knew there was gonna be a transition time,
Yeah,
right?
and we're in that.
And that's okay, and I'm willing to say, we can continue to, I like this calculation, cause this essentially says we're gonna fund you about the same level we've been funding you minus the sound equipment guy. So, I'm okay with this. As they are raising revenue, i.e. the Dowdle puzzle, i.e. keeping the revenue from ticket sales, i.e. donations, all the other stuff that comes in, over time, theoretically, our contribution wouldn't need to be as much. Maybe we just commit to a number and that's what happens every year, and then as they grow their revenue, they can grow the programs that they do. But I don't believe it's aligned with what our budget constraints are right now, for us to look at funding new programs, just any new programs. I just don't think that's what we do right now.
Agree 100%. The transitionary period, and this makes sense. But the idea is that we would start to contribute less over time, right? And they fundraise and pay for a lot of things.
Theoretically, I'm not even necessarily saying that we would need, that the city giving less is the ultimate goal, could be, and I'm okay with that. What I'm suggesting is that increases in programs or increases in budgets can't be on the city's dime. That has to be done through their revenue generating dime.
Well, I think they're years, I mean, if I'm speaking for me, I think we're years from cutting into that, I mean, cause I think they're gonna need years of ramp up.
That's why I'm
agree.
saying it's gonna take some
So
time.
I said over time.
I just don't wanna scare them,
No,
they're
no.
probably listening to that, I don't want them to think next year we're gonna go down to
No,
40.
No.
I'm saying they're gonna need, I'm just clarifying, I think we're all saying
But I
the same
think
thing.
that they need to know, I mean, at least to me, that was one of the core tenets of going this route, was that they would be able to fundraise in other ways and pay for a lot of the things that they wanna do, and instead of asking the city for more. And we've had this discussion before, so maybe maybe I can word this in a little bit better way. We were talking about the old building, et cetera. And great ideas and fantastic things. Some guys know what my son went through, benefit from a lot of those things, but there are a lot of the things listed there that are not necessarily in the city's purview. We're already paying taxes to other entities that does fall under their purview, and there are partnerships that can be leveraged there. There's other ways to do it than the city duplicating that funding, if that makes sense, so.
And that list of programs, great, awesome stuff.
Cool idea. Sure.
But when we're in here talking budgetary cuts and budgetary restraints and cutting our own parks and events and activities and how we can consolidate, expanding year one may not be the best. And this is their hopes and wants and dreams list, right? And if there's a couple, $5,000-$10,000 that maybe we can add to their budget and get a couple of those things, I'd probably be appreciative, but I don't see that with what our current constraints are right now.
I don't see it.
I think that's the fundamental thing, is we can't increase add programs.
Well, year one, yeah.
Well, and I would say this, I don't think that with this new structure, the city should be the source, the taxpayer revenue should be the source of increasing the FOH budget. That's the part that I'm saying, is that I'm okay us continuing to support at the level which we've historically supported. and I think that your calculation that you come up with reflects that level of commitment. What I'm opposed to is saying, if there's additional programs you want to add, you have to go get that revenue yourself. It cannot be on taxpayer dime to add new programs. As good as they may be, and as beneficial as they may be, that's the whole reason we set up a separate program, is because if we were just looking at it from a city standpoint, we wouldn't be adding new committees right now. We wouldn't be adding new programs. And it's the same thing whether it's us or it's them.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't the summer program bring in close to that amount of revenue?
It was about 46.
50-ish?
2 years ago was bigger than this last
It
year.
just depends on the show.
Yeah, it depends on the show and the
Like
program.
you said,
But
depends
40,
on the-
I mean, you're around 40,000. I mean, they could knock out a lot of those programs unless they've already got that budget or towards something else,
Well,
yeah, so.
But see, we're counting that, all the revenues. Do you see, so
We're not counting it, all right?
we're counting in this in calculation, we're taking
Oh,
it
We're
out.
taking it
okay.
out of what, because
see.
we would have offset
We
those
would,
in our
I
budget.
see, okay.
However,
Because instead of-
they do have control over what they charge for
Right.
ticket sales, so they do have some leeway there if they need to generate additional revenue.
And for those events, if they can self-fund and sell tickets for those events, then
Yeah, they'll
They
increase
get
their-
sponsors, they get to keep more of the revenue, right?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
okay,
So you're good with what we have here?
yes.
Yes.
Okay. Michael, can we get to 2.4 in 4 minutes?
Yes,
Do you have a presentation?
no, I don't. So essentially, this is just to see if we had any questions from the council. Because on your next council agenda for action, and I don't know if it'll be consent or not, but we'll have essentially two items relative to the CDBG. One is essentially an agreement that Harriman will be a part of the urban county, which Salt Lake County will administrate for CDBG funds starting July 1st, 2024. That's a 3-year funding cycle. The other is that it would be, the agreement was in your packet, that we would essentially hire the county to do all of our paperwork, all the HUD administrative work, all the documents that have to be filed and reports with HUD. 20 years ago, when I worked for Taylorsville, another staff member was part-time tasked with CDBG work. In addition to that role, we also had a consultant. It is a lot of paperwork, this grant administration. And so even though there is a,
So you're saying you don't wanna do it?
no, we would need to either hire a consultant or maybe a grant administrator, which maybe in different times we might look at that.
Well, this is what we've
But-
been doing.
Well, this is a little bit
Essentially,
different,
right?
so the difference here is that when we participate in the county in the past, there's no assurance that the eligible amount that we could receive would actually be spent in Harriman. By entering into this agreement, there is an obligation that we can direct all of those proceeds to our city, minus the administrative costs that the county would deduct from those CDBG funds.
Which they already kind of do.
Cause I remember
Yeah.
us talking about this last time.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty big conversation, should we
Yeah.
continue to do it with them or do it on our own sort
Well,
of
it was the same thing we talked about with like the water conservation thing, right? It's just cheaper to let them do what
Yeah.
they're doing and not bring that
Not redoing the
headache
budget.
and cost into
Why would
us,
we
yeah.
duplicate?
Right.
We will still need
Because it would
to,
cost us more and
It sounds-
take us more effort to do what they're already
It sounds
doing.
like this change is more beneficial.
it is.
So-
We'll still need to identify projects that are eligible, and obviously we will still need to provide documentation to the county, which they in turn would put in the right, format and send to HUD and everything, yeah, so there's some work on our part, but I think completely manageable, and I know Wendy's had some experience with this in other communities as well, so.
Consent?
Yeah, it's good to go.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Okay, let's try and get through Title
Goes
V.
against my emancipation agenda.
Okay, I don't think anything of these we'll get through in 5 minutes, so I will look for a motion motion to go into
I'll make a motion
CFS.
to temporarily recess city council work meeting and go to Harriman City Fire Service Area Agenda meeting.
Ready?
Second.
Second by Steve, all in favor?
Aye.
Like it's a minute to, still do.